Question 1. Comparative studies suggest that the effectiveness of a SIEM solution like QRadar v7.5 is significantly influenced by its log source configuration. When faced with a broad range of potential log sources, what is the most professionally sound approach to optimizing log collection for both security efficacy and operational efficiency within a U.S. regulatory context? Option A. Enable logging for all available event types across all log sources to ensure maximum data visibility, regardless of storage or performance implications. Option B. Implement a risk-based prioritization strategy, focusing on collecting logs from critical assets and security-relevant event types that directly support incident detection, response, and compliance mandates, while tuning out low-value noise. Option C. Disable logging for entire categories of devices or event types that are perceived as low risk without conducting a thorough risk assessment or documenting the decision. Option D. Rely exclusively on vendor-provided default log source configurations without any customization to ensure a standardized and simple setup. The correct answer is B. Implement a risk-based prioritization strategy, focusing on collecting logs from critical assets and security-relevant event types that directly support incident detection, response, and compliance mandates, while tuning out low-value noise. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in SIEM administration, balancing the need for comprehensive logging with the practical constraints of storage, performance, and regulatory compliance. The professional challenge lies in making informed decisions about log source configuration that align with both technical requirements and the specific data retention and auditing mandates applicable within the QRadar SIEM v7.5 administration context, which implicitly assumes a U.S. regulatory environment for this exam. Careful judgment is required to avoid overlogging, which can lead to performance degradation and increased costs, or underlogging, which can result in compliance violations and missed security incidents. The correct approach involves a risk-based methodology for log source tuning. This means prioritizing the collection of logs that are most critical for security monitoring, incident response, and regulatory compliance. For example, logs from critical servers, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and authentication services are typically high priority. This approach represents best professional practice because it is efficient, effective, and compliant. It ensures that QRadar is optimized for performance while still capturing the necessary data to meet security objectives and regulatory requirements, such as those mandated by HIPAA or PCI DSS, which often dictate specific logging and auditing standards. By focusing on high-value logs, administrators can reduce noise, improve detection rates, and ensure that audit trails are robust and readily available. An incorrect approach would be to enable logging for every possible event on every log source without a clear understanding of its value. This is professionally unacceptable because it leads to excessive data volume, straining QRadar's processing and storage capabilities, and potentially obscuring critical security events within a sea of irrelevant data. From a regulatory perspective, this indiscriminate logging can also be problematic. While it might seem like more is better, it can lead to difficulties in demonstrating compliance with specific data retention policies or audit requirements, as the sheer volume of data makes it harder to locate and present relevant information. Furthermore, it can increase the risk of data breaches by expanding the attack surface and the amount of sensitive data stored unnecessarily. Another incorrect approach is to disable logging for entire categories of devices or events based on assumptions about their low security impact, without proper analysis or documentation. This is professionally unacceptable as it creates blind spots in the security posture. If a low-priority device is compromised or involved in a security incident, the lack of logs could prevent effective investigation and response, leading to significant business impact and potential regulatory penalties for failing to adequately monitor and protect systems. Ethically, it represents a failure to uphold the duty of care to protect organizational assets and data. A third incorrect approach is to solely rely on vendor defaults for log source configuration without customization. While vendor defaults can provide a baseline, they are often not optimized for specific organizations' risk profile, threat landscape, or regulatory obligations. This can lead to either overlogging or underlogging, both of which are professionally deficient. It demonstrates a lack of proactive engagement and a failure to tailor security controls to the unique environment, which is a cornerstone of effective security management and compliance. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a structured approach. 1. Understand the organization's security objectives and risk appetite. 2. Identify relevant regulatory and compliance requirements, e.g., PCI DSS, HIPAA, SOX. 3. Inventory all log sources and understand the types of events they generate. 4. Prioritize log sources and event types based on their criticality for security monitoring, incident response, and compliance. 5. Configure QRadar to collect prioritized logs, tuning out noise and irrelevant data. 6. Regularly review and refine log source configurations based on evolving threats, business needs, and regulatory changes. 7. Document all configuration decisions and the rationale behind them. Question 2. System analysis indicates that the QRadar SIEM v7.5 deployment is experiencing performance degradation and escalating storage costs. A review of log source configurations is required to optimize the system. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional best practices for managing log sources in a regulated environment? Option A. Enable logging for all available log sources within the network to ensure maximum data capture, regardless of its immediate relevance or cost implications. Option B. Disable logging for specific systems or applications that are perceived as generating excessive log data without conducting a formal risk assessment or obtaining explicit approval. Option C. Focus on increasing the overall volume of logs ingested by the SIEM, as a higher log count is generally indicative of a more robust security monitoring posture. Option D. Implement a risk-based approach to log source selection, prioritizing data that is critical for security monitoring, incident investigation, and compliance with relevant regulations, while actively tuning out low-value or redundant data. The correct answer is D. Implement a risk-based approach to log source selection, prioritizing data that is critical for security monitoring, incident investigation, and compliance with relevant regulations, while actively tuning out low-value or redundant data. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in SIEM administration, balancing the need for comprehensive logging with the practical constraints of storage, performance, and regulatory compliance. The professional challenge lies in making informed decisions about log source configuration that directly impact the security posture, incident response capabilities, and adherence to data retention policies. Misconfigurations can lead to missed security events, excessive resource utilization, or non-compliance with data privacy regulations, all of which carry significant professional and organizational risks. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic, risk-based evaluation of log sources. This aligns with best practices for SIEM management, emphasizing the principle of collect what matters. By prioritizing log sources based on their criticality to security monitoring, compliance requirements, and incident investigation, administrators ensure that valuable data is captured and analyzed effectively. This approach minimizes noise, optimizes SIEM performance, and reduces storage costs while maintaining the ability to detect and respond to threats. It also directly supports regulatory frameworks that mandate specific logging and monitoring capabilities for sensitive data and critical systems. For example, in a U.S. context, regulations like HIPAA or PCI DSS require specific types of logs to be collected and retained for security and audit purposes. A risk-based approach ensures these requirements are met efficiently. Incorrect approaches analysis. Collecting all available logs without discrimination is professionally unacceptable because it leads to a data deluge. This overwhelms the SIEM, degrades performance, increases storage costs unnecessarily, and makes it difficult to identify genuine security threats amidst the noise. From a regulatory perspective, this approach can be seen as a failure to implement effective controls, as it doesn't demonstrate a targeted effort to monitor for specific risks or comply with data minimization principles often embedded in privacy regulations. Disabling logging for certain critical systems or applications without a documented risk assessment and explicit approval is a severe regulatory and ethical failure. This creates blind spots in the security monitoring capabilities, leaving the organization vulnerable to undetected attacks. It directly contravenes the spirit and often the letter of regulations that require comprehensive logging for accountability and security assurance. Such an action could be interpreted as negligence or a deliberate attempt to circumvent security requirements, leading to significant legal and financial repercussions. Focusing solely on the volume of logs collected, rather than their quality and relevance, is a flawed metric. It prioritizes quantity over effectiveness, leading to a false sense of security. This approach fails to address the core purpose of a SIEM, which is to provide actionable security intelligence. It also risks non-compliance if the collected logs do not meet the specific requirements of relevant regulations, even if the volume is high. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a structured decision-making process that begins with understanding the organization's security objectives and regulatory obligations. This involves identifying critical assets, potential threats, and compliance mandates. A thorough risk assessment should then inform the selection of log sources, prioritizing those that provide the most value for threat detection, incident response, and compliance. Regular review and tuning of log source configurations are essential to adapt to evolving threats and regulatory landscapes. Documentation of all configuration decisions, including the rationale behind including or excluding specific log sources, is crucial for auditability and accountability. Question 3. To address the challenge of optimizing QRadar SIEM v7, 5 performance and storage utilization while ensuring comprehensive security monitoring and regulatory compliance, which of the following approaches represents the most effective best practice for integrating new log sources and defining data retention policies? Option A. A phased integration strategy that prioritizes log sources based on regulatory mandates and security criticality, coupled with a tiered data retention policy that aligns with compliance requirements and data value. Option B. Immediately integrate all available log sources to ensure maximum visibility and implement a uniform, long-term data retention policy for all ingested data to satisfy potential audit requests. Option C. Integrate only log sources that are directly mandated by the most stringent regulations and apply a short, risk-averse data retention policy to all logs to conserve resources. Option D. Proactively disable logging for any system not explicitly identified as critical for immediate security threats, and set a short, uniform data retention period for all remaining logs to minimize storage costs. The correct answer is A. A phased integration strategy that prioritizes log sources based on regulatory mandates and security criticality, coupled with a tiered data retention policy that aligns with compliance requirements and data value. Explanation. Scenario analysis. The scenario presents a common challenge in SIEM administration, balancing the need for comprehensive logging to meet regulatory compliance and incident response requirements with the practical constraints of storage, performance, and cost. Overlogging can lead to overwhelming data volumes, impacting search performance and increasing operational expenses. Underlogging, conversely, creates blind spots, hindering effective threat detection and potentially violating audit requirements. The professional challenge lies in making informed decisions about log source inclusion and data retention policies that are both effective and efficient, while remaining compliant with relevant regulations. This requires a deep understanding of the organization's risk profile, business objectives, and the specific requirements of applicable regulatory frameworks. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a risk-based, phased implementation of log source integration and data retention. This begins with identifying critical log sources that are mandated by relevant regulations, e.g., PCI DSS, HIPAA, GDPR, depending on the jurisdiction and industry, and those essential for detecting high-priority threats. A thorough assessment of the data generated by these sources, its value for security monitoring and compliance, and its impact on QRadar performance and storage is crucial. Implementing a tiered data retention policy, where critical logs are retained for longer periods and less critical logs for shorter durations, optimizes storage and performance while meeting compliance needs. Regular review and tuning of log source configurations and retention policies based on evolving threats, business needs, and regulatory changes are also hallmarks of best practice. This approach ensures that QRadar is effectively utilized to meet security and compliance objectives without incurring unnecessary costs or performance degradation. Incorrect approach is analysis. Implementing all available log sources without prior assessment and prioritization is a failure to adhere to best practices for efficient SIEM management. This approach can lead to excessive data ingestion, overwhelming QRadar's processing capabilities, increasing storage costs, and making it difficult to identify relevant security events amidst the noise. From a regulatory perspective, while more data might seem better, it can also lead to increased audit complexity and cost, and if not properly managed, may still result in missed critical events due to performance issues. Disabling logging for all non-critical systems without a formal risk assessment or understanding of potential compliance gaps is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This creates blind spots in security monitoring, leaving the organization vulnerable to undetected threats. It also directly contravenes the spirit, if not the letter, of many regulations that mandate comprehensive logging for accountability and auditability. Such an approach prioritizes cost savings over security and compliance, which is professionally unacceptable. Adopting a one-size-fits-all data retention policy for all log sources, regardless of their criticality or regulatory mandate, is inefficient and potentially non-compliant. Retaining low-value logs for extended periods consumes unnecessary storage and processing resources. Conversely, retaining critical compliance logs for too short a period can lead to violations if an audit or investigation requires access to historical data that has been purged. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of data lifecycle management and its implications for both operational efficiency and regulatory adherence. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach SIEM administration with a strategic mindset, prioritizing security and compliance. The decision-making process should involve 1. Understanding the organization's specific regulatory landscape and risk appetite. 2. Conducting a thorough inventory and risk assessment of potential log sources. 3. Prioritizing log source integration based on security value and compliance mandates. 4. Developing and implementing a tiered data retention strategy. 5. Establishing a continuous monitoring and tuning process for the SIEM environment. This systematic approach ensures that the SIEM effectively supports security operations and meets all legal and ethical obligations. Question 4. The audit findings indicate that the organization's incident response procedures for a recent data exfiltration event were not fully documented, leading to inconsistencies in how affected systems were isolated and how evidence was preserved. This raises concerns about the effectiveness of the response and potential compliance gaps. Which of the following actions best represents a best practice for addressing these findings and strengthening future incident response? Option A. Focus on expediting the restoration of affected services to minimize business disruption, with a secondary, less prioritized effort to document what happened after operations are back to normal. Option B. Conduct a thorough review and update of the incident response plan, incorporating detailed playbooks for various incident types, emphasizing clear roles and responsibilities for containment and evidence handling, and ensuring regular training and tabletop exercises to validate the updated procedures. Option C. Instruct the IT team to delete all logs and system records related to the incident to prevent further scrutiny and potential liabilities. Option D. Immediately implement a new, more aggressive automated threat detection system to prevent future incidents, assuming that improved detection will inherently resolve procedural gaps. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review and update of the incident response plan, incorporating detailed playbooks for various incident types, emphasizing clear roles and responsibilities for containment and evidence handling, and ensuring regular training and tabletop exercises to validate the updated procedures. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential gap in the organization's incident response capabilities, specifically concerning the timely and effective containment of security breaches. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a balance between operational efficiency, regulatory compliance, and the inherent complexities of incident response. The pressure to restore services quickly can sometimes lead to shortcuts that compromise thoroughness, potentially exacerbating the incident or leading to regulatory noncompliance. The correct approach, which involves a structured incident response plan that prioritizes containment and eradication based on risk assessment, represents best professional practice. This aligns with the principles of due diligence and prudent risk management expected under general data protection and cybersecurity frameworks. By following a defined process, the organization ensures that actions taken are deliberate, documented, and aimed at minimizing damage and preventing recurrence, thereby upholding its legal and ethical obligations to protect sensitive data and maintain system integrity. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on rapid restoration without adequate containment risks regulatory violations. For instance, if customer data is compromised and not properly isolated, the organization could fail to meet notification requirements under data protection laws, leading to fines and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach, such as over-reliance on automated responses without human oversight, might lead to unintended consequences, like disabling critical business functions or failing to identify the root cause, which could also be viewed as a failure of due care. A third incorrect approach, involving the deletion of logs or evidence to clean up the incident, is a severe ethical and regulatory breach, as it obstructs forensic investigation and can be interpreted as an attempt to conceal the incident. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the incident's scope and potential impact. This involves consulting the established incident response plan, assessing the risks to data confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and then executing containment and eradication strategies in a phased, documented manner. Continuous communication with stakeholders, including legal and compliance teams, is crucial throughout the process to ensure adherence to all applicable regulations and ethical standards. Question 5. The monitoring system demonstrates a significant increase in data volume, impacting QRadar performance. The administrator must decide which log sources to prioritize for ingestion and analysis to ensure compliance with U.S. financial industry regulations and maintain optimal system performance. Which of the following approaches best balances these competing demands? Option A. Prioritize ingestion of logs from systems directly involved in customer data processing, authentication, and critical infrastructure changes, while implementing intelligent filtering for other log sources to capture only high-fidelity security events. Option B. Disable logging for all non-critical servers and applications to reduce data volume, focusing only on logs explicitly mandated by the most basic regulatory requirements. Option C. Exclude log sources that incur higher ingestion or storage costs, regardless of their potential security relevance or regulatory implications, to manage operational expenses. Option D. Ingest all available logs from every device and application within the network to ensure maximum visibility and address performance issues through hardware upgrades. The correct answer is A. Prioritize ingestion of logs from systems directly involved in customer data processing, authentication, and critical infrastructure changes, while implementing intelligent filtering for other log sources to capture only high-fidelity security events. Explanation: this scenario presents a common implementation challenge in SIEM administration, balancing the need for comprehensive logging with the practical constraints of data storage and performance. The professional challenge lies in making informed decisions about log source inclusion and event filtering that align with both security objectives and regulatory compliance requirements without overwhelming the QRadar system. Careful judgment is required to ensure that critical security events are captured and analyzed, while avoiding unnecessary data ingestion that could lead to performance degradation or increased operational costs. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes the collection of logs that are explicitly mandated by relevant U.S. cybersecurity regulations and industry best practices for financial institutions. This includes logs related to access control, authentication, and critical system changes, which are essential for detecting and responding to security incidents and for demonstrating compliance during audits. By focusing on these high-priority log sources and implementing intelligent filtering, the administrator ensures that QRadar is effectively utilized for its core security monitoring functions, meeting regulatory obligations without compromising system stability. An incorrect approach that involves disabling logging for all non-critical servers, regardless of their potential security relevance, fails to meet the due diligence expected under U.S. regulations such as the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, GLBA, or the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard, PCI DSS. These regulations often require a comprehensive understanding of the IT environment and the logging of events that could indicate a compromise, even if the server is not directly handling sensitive customer data. This approach risks missing critical indicators of compromise originating from seemingly less important systems that could be used as pivot points. Another incorrect approach, which is to ingest all available logs from every device without any prior analysis or filtering is professionally unacceptable due to its inefficiency and potential to violate data minimization principles. Seemingly comprehensive, this can lead to a data deluge, where critical security events are lost in the noise, hindering effective threat detection. Furthermore, depending on the specific data captured, this could inadvertently lead to the collection of personally identifiable information, PI, or other sensitive data that is not strictly necessary for security monitoring, potentially creating compliance issues under regulations like the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, if applicable to the organization, or general data privacy concerns. A third incorrect approach, focusing solely on cost reduction by excluding log sources that are perceived as expensive to ingest or store without a thorough risk assessment, is also professionally unsound. Regulatory compliance often mandates specific logging requirements that cannot be bypassed solely for economic reasons. Proper risk assessment would weigh the cost of ingestion against the potential impact of not detecting a security incident related to that log source, ensuring that decisions are risk-informed and compliant. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. 1. Understand the organization's regulatory landscape and identify all applicable U.S. cybersecurity and data privacy laws and industry standards. 2. Conduct a thorough risk assessment to identify critical assets and potential threats. 3. Map regulatory requirements and identified risks to specific log sources and event types. 4. Prioritize log source ingestion based on their criticality for security monitoring and compliance. 5. Implement intelligent filtering and correlation rules to focus on actionable security events. 6. Regularly review and refine the logging strategy based on evolving threats, regulatory changes, and system performance. 7. Document all decisions and their justifications for audit purposes. Question 6. Stakeholder feedback indicates a desire to log every network connection attempt, including successful and failed attempts, across all network segments to ensure complete visibility. The QRadar administrator is concerned about the potential impact on system performance and storage capacity, as well as the relevance of such granular logging for all segments. What is the most professionally sound approach to address this request while adhering to U.S. regulatory frameworks governing data security and privacy? Option A. Implement granular logging for all network connection attempts across all segments as requested to satisfy stakeholder demands for complete visibility. Option B. Fulfill the request by logging every network connection attempt without further analysis, assuming that more data is always better for security and compliance. Option C. Prioritize logging of network connection attempts for critical assets and segments identified through a risk assessment, and for events explicitly mandated by relevant U.S. regulations, while exploring aggregation or sampling for less critical segments. Option D. Disable logging for failed connection attempts on less critical segments to immediately reduce storage and performance load, as these are often less indicative of a targeted attack. The correct answer is A. Implement granular logging for all network connection attempts across all segments as requested to satisfy stakeholder demands for complete visibility. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge in SIEM administration, balancing the need for comprehensive logging with the practical constraints of storage, performance, and regulatory compliance. Stakeholders, often from different departments with varying priorities, may not fully grasp the technical implications of their requests. The challenge lies in translating business needs and perceived security gaps into actionable, technically feasible, and compliant logging policies. Overlogging can lead to data overload, making threat detection difficult and increasing costs, while underlogging can create compliance gaps and miss security events. The administrator must navigate these competing interests while adhering to the specific regulatory framework relevant to the organization's operations, which for this exam is assumed to be U.S.-based regulatory frameworks governing data security and privacy. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic, risk-based methodology that aligns logging with specific compliance requirements and identified threats. This means understanding which data is mandated by regulations, e.g., access logs for sensitive data under HIPAA, audit trails for financial transactions under SOX, and then prioritizing logging based on the potential impact of security incidents. Implementing granular logging for critical assets and high-risk activities, while employing aggregation or sampling for less critical data, demonstrates a mature security posture. This approach ensures that QRadar is configured to effectively detect and respond to threats relevant to the organization's risk profile and regulatory obligations, without overwhelming the system or incurring unnecessary costs. It reflects best professional practice by prioritizing efficiency, effectiveness, and compliance. Incorrect approach is analysis. Implementing logging for every single event without a clear rationale or risk assessment is a failure to adhere to principles of efficient resource management and effective threat detection. This approach can lead to data noise, making it harder to identify genuine threats and potentially violating data minimization principles inherent in many privacy regulations. It also fails to consider the performance impact on QRadar, potentially degrading its ability to perform real-time analysis. Fulfilling every stakeholder request without technical validation or consideration of regulatory impact is a direct abdication of professional responsibility. This can lead to overlogging of irrelevant data, increasing storage and processing costs, and underlogging of critical security events due to a lack of focus. It also risks non-compliance if the requested logging does not align with regulatory mandates, or if the sheer volume of data obscures required audit trails. Disabling logging for certain event types solely to reduce storage costs without a thorough risk assessment or understanding of regulatory requirements is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. This action could create blind spots in security monitoring, leading to undetected breaches, and could result in non-compliance with audit trail requirements mandated by regulations like SOX or HIPAA, exposing the organization to fines and reputational damage. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach logging configuration by first identifying all applicable regulatory requirements, and then conducting a comprehensive risk assessment to understand the organization's threat landscape. This involves collaborating with stakeholders to understand their concerns, but critically evaluating their requests against technical feasibility, cost implications, and compliance mandates. The decision-making process should prioritize data that is essential for security monitoring, incident response, and regulatory compliance. A phased implementation, starting with critical logs and gradually expanding based on validated needs and risk appetite, is often the most effective strategy. Regular review and tuning of logging policies are also crucial to adapt to evolving threats and regulatory landscapes. Question 7. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing advanced threat detection capabilities in QRadar SIEM v7.5 offers a significant return on investment for enhancing the organization's security posture. However, the initial implementation and ongoing operational costs are substantial. Considering the need for effective threat detection and response, what is the most prudent approach to leverage these advanced features? Option A. Immediately enable all available advanced threat detection features within QRadar to ensure maximum coverage from the outset, regardless of immediate operational impact. Option B. Develop a large number of highly complex custom detection rules across all potential threat vectors to proactively identify every possible attack scenario, even if it leads to a high volume of alerts. Option C. Defer the implementation of advanced features until a future budget cycle, focusing solely on basic log collection and correlation to minimize upfront costs. Option D. Implement advanced detection rules and use cases in a phased manner, prioritizing those that address the most critical identified threats, and continuously tune them based on observed activity and analyst feedback. The correct answer is D. Implement advanced detection rules and use cases in a phased manner, prioritizing those that address the most critical identified threats, and continuously tune them based on observed activity and analyst feedback. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in SIEM administration, balancing the need for comprehensive threat detection with the practical constraints of resource allocation and potential false positive fatigue. The organization has identified a critical need to enhance its security posture by implementing advanced threat detection capabilities within QRadar SIEM v7.5. However, the cost-benefit analysis, while indicating a positive ROI, highlights significant upfront investment and ongoing operational costs. The challenge lies in selecting the most effective and compliant approach to achieve the desired security outcomes without introducing undue risk or operational burden. The correct approach involves a phased, risk-based implementation of QRadar's advanced features, prioritizing those that directly address the most critical threats identified in the organization's risk assessment. This aligns with best practices for security management, which emphasize a proactive and adaptive security strategy. By focusing on high-priority use cases and gradually expanding coverage, the organization can demonstrate value early, refine its detection rules based on real-world data, and manage the learning curve for its security analysts. This methodical approach ensures that the investment in QRadar is optimized for maximum security impact and operational efficiency, while adhering to the principles of due diligence and prudent resource management expected in a regulated environment. An incorrect approach would be to immediately enable all advanced features without proper planning or validation. This could lead to an overwhelming volume of alerts, a phenomenon known as alert fatigue, where genuine threats are missed due to the sheer noise of false positives. This not only degrades the effectiveness of the SIEM, but also wastes valuable analyst time and resources, potentially leading to a breach that could have been prevented. From a regulatory perspective, failing to implement security controls effectively, even if purchased, could be seen as a deficiency in meeting compliance obligations related to data protection and incident response. Another incorrect approach would be to delay implementation due to the perceived complexity or cost, thereby leaving critical vulnerabilities unaddressed. This passive stance increases the organization's attack surface and exposure to threats, which is a direct contravention of the duty of care expected of security professionals. In the event of a security incident, such inaction could be viewed as negligence, with significant legal and reputational consequences. A third incorrect approach might involve implementing features in a way that creates significant operational overhead without a clear security benefit, such as custom rule development that is not well documented or tested. This can lead to a brittle security environment that is difficult to maintain and prone to errors, undermining the overall security posture and potentially failing to meet compliance requirements for robust and reliable security controls. The professional reasoning process for this situation should involve a thorough understanding of the organization's threat landscape, risk appetite, and regulatory obligations. It requires a strategic approach to SIEM deployment, focusing on phased implementation, continuous tuning, and ongoing training for security personnel. The goal is to maximize the return on investment in security technology while ensuring that the organization remains compliant and resilient against evolving threats. Question 8. The investigation demonstrates a need to integrate a newly deployed, high-transaction volume financial services application into the QRadar SIEM v7.5 environment. Given the application's criticality and the stringent regulatory requirements for audit trails and data retention in the financial sector, what is the most professional and compliant approach to configuring its log sources within QRadar? Option A. Implement a granular logging policy that captures all security-relevant events, including authentication attempts, transaction anomalies, and administrative changes, with retention periods aligned with specific financial regulations and audit requirements. Option B. Rely on the default QRadar log source configurations for financial applications, assuming they adequately cover the necessary security and compliance needs. Option C. Enable verbose logging for all events generated by the application to ensure maximum data visibility for potential future analysis, regardless of immediate security relevance. Option D. Disable logging for non-critical event categories, such as routine system health checks, to reduce the volume of data ingested by QRadar and minimize storage costs. The correct answer is A. Implement a granular logging policy that captures all security-relevant events, including authentication attempts, transaction anomalies, and administrative changes, with retention periods aligned with specific financial regulations and audit requirements. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a common challenge in SIEM administration, balancing the need for comprehensive logging with the practical constraints of storage, performance, and regulatory compliance. In the context of C1000-156 QRadar SIEM v7.5 administration, specifically focusing on log source management and data retention policies, the challenge lies in identifying and implementing the most effective strategy for a new critical application. This requires understanding the application's criticality, its data sensitivity, and the organization's legal and business requirements for log data. Careful judgment is needed to avoid overlogging, which can lead to performance issues and increased costs, or underlogging, which can result in regulatory noncompliance and an inability to conduct effective incident investigations. The correct approach involves a phased, risk-based strategy. This begins with a thorough understanding of the application's data, its potential security implications, and the specific regulatory mandates e.g. data breach notification laws, industry-specific compliance requirements that dictate log retention and content. Implementing a granular logging policy that captures only essential security events, along with appropriate retention periods aligned with these mandates, represents best professional practice. This ensures that QRadar can effectively detect and respond to threats without unnecessary resource consumption. This approach is ethically sound, as it prioritizes data security and privacy while meeting compliance obligations. An incorrect approach would be to enable verbose logging for all events from the new application without prior analysis. This is professionally unacceptable because it can lead to significant performance degradation of the QRadar SIEM, impacting its ability to process other critical log sources and generate timely alerts. Ethically and regulatorily, it represents a failure to manage resources efficiently and could lead to unnecessary data storage, potentially increasing the risk of data exposure and violating data minimization principles if sensitive information is logged without a clear business or regulatory need. Another incorrect approach is to disable logging for certain sensitive event types from the application, assuming they are not critical. This is professionally unacceptable, as it creates blind spots in security monitoring. Regulatorily, it could lead to non-compliance if the disabled logs are required for audit trails or incident response under relevant regulations. It demonstrates a lack of due diligence in understanding the application's security posture and the potential impact of missing log data. A third incorrect approach is to rely solely on default QRadar logging configurations without customization for the new application. While defaults provide a baseline, they are rarely optimized for specific application criticality or unique regulatory requirements. This approach is professionally unacceptable because it fails to leverage the full capabilities of QRadar for tailored security and compliance. It can lead to either insufficient logging for critical events or excessive logging of non-essential data, both of which undermine the effectiveness of the SIEM and can lead to regulatory scrutiny. The professional reasoning process for such situations involves 1. Understanding the business and technical context of the new application. 2. Identifying all applicable regulatory and compliance requirements related to data logging and retention. 3. Assessing the security risks associated with the application and its data. 4. Collaborating with application owners and security stakeholders to define essential logging parameters. 5. Configuring QRadar log sources and retention policies based on this analysis, prioritizing critical security events. 6. Regularly reviewing and tuning logging configurations to ensure ongoing effectiveness and compliance. Question 9. Upon reviewing the implementation plan for a new QRadar SIEM v7.5 deployment, a project manager expresses concern about meeting the aggressive go-live deadline. They propose integrating all critical log sources immediately, without conducting a full testing and validation cycle for each source before the official launch, arguing that post-launch tuning can address any issues. What is the most professionally responsible approach to ensure both timely deployment and robust security monitoring? Option A. Focus solely on meeting the go-live date by deploying the SIEM with basic log source configurations, assuming that any immediate security gaps will be addressed through ad hoc adjustments as incidents arise. Option B. Integrate all critical log sources immediately to meet the go-live deadline, and plan for post-launch tuning and validation of log parsing and event correlation. Option C. Implement log source integration in phases, with thorough testing and validation of each critical log source before proceeding to the next, and document all validation results to demonstrate due diligence. Option D. Prioritize the integration of a select few critical log sources that are easiest to configure, deferring the integration of more complex or sensitive log sources to a later, undefined phase. The correct answer is C. Implement log source integration in phases, with thorough testing and validation of each critical log source before proceeding to the next, and document all validation results to demonstrate due diligence. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common implementation challenge where a critical security control, log source integration, is being rushed due to perceived external pressure. The professional challenge lies in balancing the urgency of deployment with the necessity of thorough validation and adherence to established security best practices and potential regulatory compliance requirements. Rushing the integration without proper testing risks introducing vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, or incomplete data collection, which can have significant security and compliance implications. The pressure from stakeholders to go live without adequate due diligence is a frequent hurdle in IT security projects. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach prioritizes a phased rollout with comprehensive testing and validation. This aligns with best practices for implementing security solutions, ensuring that the QRadar SIEM effectively ingests, parses, and analyzes logs from critical sources. This methodical approach minimizes the risk of operational disruption, data loss, or security gaps. From a regulatory perspective, especially within a framework like the UK's GDPR or NIS directive, demonstrating due diligence in security control implementation is paramount. A phased approach allows for auditable proof of testing and validation, which is crucial for compliance reporting and incident response readiness. It ensures that the SIEM is not just deployed, but is functional and providing accurate security intelligence. Incorrect approaches analysis. Implementing log source integration without prior testing and validation introduces significant risks. This approach fails to demonstrate due diligence in establishing a robust security monitoring capability. It could lead to unparsed logs, incorrect event categorization, or missed critical security events, directly contravening the principles of effective security monitoring and potentially violating regulatory requirements for data protection and incident detection. Deploying the SIEM with only a subset of critical log sources integrated, while deferring the rest to a later, undefined phase, creates an incomplete security posture. This leaves critical assets and data vulnerable to undetected threats. It also complicates incident response and forensic analysis, as a complete picture of the security environment will be unavailable. This incomplete coverage can be a direct violation of regulatory mandates that require comprehensive monitoring of IT infrastructure. Focusing solely on the go-live date without considering the operational readiness of the SIEM for critical log sources is a failure of risk management. It prioritizes a project milestone over the actual security effectiveness of the deployed system. This can lead to a false sense of security and a failure to meet regulatory obligations that demand demonstrable security controls and effective threat detection. Professional reasoning. When faced with pressure to deploy a critical security system like QRadar SIEM, professionals must employ a risk-based decision-making framework. This involves 1. Identifying critical security requirements and regulatory obligations related to log management and security monitoring. 2. Assessing the risks associated with incomplete or improperly configured log source integration. 3. Prioritizing integration of log sources based on criticality and regulatory impact. 4. Developing a phased implementation plan that includes rigorous testing, validation, and documentation at each stage. 5. Communicating the risks and the rationale for a phased approach to stakeholders, emphasizing the long-term security and compliance benefits over short-term expediency. 6. Ensuring that the deployment plan is auditable and can demonstrate compliance with relevant regulations. Question 10. The audit findings indicate a significant gap in the visibility of potential security incidents due to insufficient log data being collected by the QRadar SIEM. To address this, a proposal has been made to enhance log collection. Which of the following approaches best aligns with professional best practices and regulatory expectations for managing QRadar SIEM in a regulated environment? Option A. Implement a phased approach to enable logging for high-priority log sources first, based on a risk assessment, and monitor QRadar performance and storage utilization closely. Option B. Disable logging for systems deemed less critical to free up QRadar resources for more critical log sources, without formal approval. Option C. Immediately enable logging for all available log sources within the QRadar console to ensure maximum data capture. Option D. Increase the log retention period for all existing log sources to ensure historical data is available for longer. Correct answer is A. Implement a phased approach to enable logging for high-priority log sources first, based on a risk assessment, and monitor QRadar performance and storage utilization closely. Explanation. This scenario presents a common challenge in SIEM administration, balancing the need for comprehensive logging with the practical constraints of storage and performance. The audit findings highlight a potential gap in incident detection and response capabilities due to insufficient log data. The professional challenge lies in determining the most effective and compliant method to enhance log collection without negatively impacting QRadar's operational efficiency or violating data retention policies. Careful judgment is required to prioritize log sources, understand their criticality for security monitoring, and align the changes with organizational security objectives and regulatory requirements. The correct approach involves a phased, risk-based methodology for increasing log collection. This aligns with best practices for SIEM management and regulatory compliance by ensuring that critical security events are captured while managing resources effectively. It demonstrates professional responsibility by prioritizing security needs based on risk assessment and by implementing changes in a controlled manner. This approach minimizes disruption and ensures that the expanded logging directly addresses the audit findings and enhances the organization's security posture. An incorrect approach of indiscriminately enabling logging for all available sources would be professionally unacceptable. This would likely lead to overwhelming the QRadar system, causing performance degradation, increased storage costs, and a flood of irrelevant data, making it harder to detect genuine threats. From a regulatory perspective, this could violate data minimization principles if sensitive but non-essential data is collected unnecessarily. It also fails to demonstrate due diligence in resource management. Another incorrect approach of simply increasing the retention period for existing logs without addressing the audit's core concern of insufficient data collection would be a failure to rectify the identified deficiency. While data retention is important, it does not solve the problem of missing critical events. This approach would be seen as a superficial fix, not a genuine improvement in security monitoring capabilities, and could lead to repeat audit findings. A third incorrect approach of disabling logging for less critical systems to free up resources for more critical ones, without a formal risk assessment and documented approval, is also professionally unsound. This bypasses established change management processes and could inadvertently remove visibility into systems that, while deemed less critical, might still be targets or involved in broader security incidents. This lack of a structured, risk-informed decision-making process is a significant ethical and professional failing. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve 1. Understanding the audit findings thoroughly and their implications for security. 2. Conducting a risk assessment of all potential log sources to determine their criticality for security monitoring and compliance. 3. Prioritizing log sources based on risk, regulatory requirements, and potential impact on security incidents. 4. Developing a phased implementation plan for enabling new log sources or increasing logging levels, including testing and validation. 5. Documenting all changes, justification, and their impact on QRadar performance and storage. 6. Regularly reviewing and optimizing log collection strategies to ensure ongoing effectiveness and efficiency. Question 11. Examination of the data shows an employee accessing a website that is not work-related during business hours, and the content of the website appears to be personal in nature. The access pattern is consistent and has been ongoing for a period. As a QRadar SIEM administrator, you have observed this activity through your monitoring tools. What is the most appropriate course of action to take regarding this observation? Option A. Report the observed activity through the established incident reporting channels to the appropriate security personnel or management, focusing on the policy violation aspect without delving into the personal content. Option B. Ignore the activity, assuming it is a minor personal matter and not a significant security concern for the organization. Option C. Conduct a more in-depth, unauthorized investigation into the employee's browsing history and personal communications to gather further evidence of misuse. Option D. Immediately confront the employee directly to discuss their personal website usage during work hours. The correct answer is A. Report the observed activity through the established incident reporting channels to the appropriate security personnel or management, focusing on the policy violation aspect without delving into the personal content. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a classic ethical dilemma in cybersecurity administration, specifically concerning data privacy and the potential for misuse of sensitive information. The challenge lies in balancing the need for security monitoring and threat detection with the individual privacy rights of employees. The administrator is privy to information that, while potentially indicative of a security risk, also reveals personal activities. Deciding how to act requires careful judgment to avoid overstepping boundaries, violating privacy, or failing in the duty to protect organizational assets. The pressure to act quickly against a perceived threat must be weighed against the potential for unwarranted surveillance and the implications for employee trust and morale. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a multi-step process that prioritizes a measured and compliant response. First, the administrator must verify the nature of the activity without further intrusive investigation into personal details. This means focusing solely on whether the observed activity constitutes a genuine security policy violation or a credible threat. If the activity is confirmed as a policy violation or a security risk, the next step is to report it through established, documented channels, such as the Security Incident Response Team or a designated manager, adhering strictly to the organization's incident reporting procedures. This approach upholds professional integrity by ensuring that actions are justified, proportionate, and follow established governance. It respects employee privacy by limiting data access and disclosure to what is strictly necessary for security purposes, and by using official reporting mechanisms, which are designed to handle such sensitive information appropriately and in accordance with relevant data protection regulations. This aligns with the principles of least privilege and data minimization, core tenets of robust security and privacy frameworks. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately confronting the employee directly about the observed personal activity. This is professionally unacceptable because it bypasses established security protocols and incident response procedures. It constitutes an unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information and an overreach of the administrator's authority, potentially violating privacy policies and data protection laws. It also risks escalating the situation unnecessarily and damaging the trust between IT security and employees. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the activity entirely, assuming it is personal and not a security concern. This is professionally unacceptable because it represents a failure in the duty to protect the organization's assets and data. Even if the activity appears personal, it could be a precursor to a more significant security incident or a violation of acceptable use policies. Ignoring it could lead to a breach or policy violation going undetected, exposing the organization to risk and potentially violating regulatory compliance requirements that mandate proactive security monitoring and incident reporting. A third incorrect approach is to conduct a deeper, unauthorized investigation into the employee's personal activities to gather more evidence before reporting. This is professionally unacceptable as it constitutes a significant breach of privacy and likely violates data protection laws and organizational policies. It moves beyond the scope of security monitoring into intrusive surveillance, eroding employee trust and creating legal and ethical liabilities for the organization. The principle of proportionality is violated as the investigation becomes disproportionate to the initial, unconfirmed concern. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should employ a decision-making framework that emphasizes adherence to policy, regulatory compliance, and ethical conduct. This framework involves 1. Identifying the core issue. Is there a potential security risk or policy violation? 2. Consulting relevant policies and regulations. Understand the organization's acceptable use policy, incident response plan, and applicable data privacy laws. 3. Limiting data access and scope. Only access and analyze data strictly necessary to determine if a security policy or regulation has been violated. Avoid exploring personal content. 4. Following established reporting channels. Report confirmed violations or risks through the designated incident response process involving the appropriate personnel. 5. Maintaining confidentiality. Ensure that any information accessed or reported is handled with the utmost confidentiality and only shared with authorized individuals. 6. Documenting actions. Keep a clear record of observations, decisions, and actions taken, ensuring transparency and accountability. This systematic approach ensures that security responsibilities are met without compromising individual privacy or violating legal and ethical standards. Question 12. Performance analysis shows a high volume of suspicious traffic originating from a specific external IP address, triggering multiple critical alerts within QRadar SIEM v7. 5. The administrator has the technical capability to immediately block this IP address at the firewall. However, the organization's incident response plan requires escalation to the Security Operations Center (SOC) for investigation and approval before taking any blocking action. What is the most appropriate course of action for the QRadar administrator? Option A. Escalate the alerts and relevant QRadar logs to the SOC team as per the incident response plan and await their guidance. Option B. Ignore the alerts, assuming they are likely false positives given the usual low volume of such events. Option C. Attempt to independently investigate the source of the traffic and make firewall configuration changes without informing the SOC. Option D. Immediately block the suspicious IP address at the firewall to prevent potential further intrusion. The correct answer is D. Immediately block the suspicious IP address at the firewall to prevent potential further intrusion. Explanation: Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between maintaining system integrity and responding to a potential security incident. The administrator must balance the need for immediate action to mitigate risk with the requirement to follow established procedures and obtain necessary approvals. Failure to do so could lead to unauthorized system changes, data breaches, or regulatory noncompliance. The pressure to act quickly in a security context can tempt administrators to bypass standard protocols, making careful judgment essential. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves escalating the issue to the designated security team and following the established incident response plan. This aligns with best professional practices because it ensures that security incidents are handled by trained personnel with the appropriate authority and resources. It also adheres to regulatory frameworks that mandate documented incident response procedures and clear lines of communication. By following the plan, the administrator demonstrates accountability, promotes collaboration, and ensures that actions taken are consistent with organizational policy and legal obligations, such as those outlined in data protection regulations that require timely and appropriate incident handling. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately disabling the suspected malicious IP address without prior authorization. This violates established incident response protocols and could lead to an incomplete investigation, potentially missing crucial forensic data. It also risks disrupting legitimate network traffic, causing operational impact and potentially violating service-level agreements or compliance requirements related to system availability. Furthermore, it bypasses the necessary approval chain, which is often a regulatory requirement for significant system changes or actions that could impact security posture. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the alert, assuming it is a false positive. This is a critical failure in professional responsibility and regulatory compliance. Security alerts, even if infrequent, must be investigated. Ignoring a potential threat can lead to a significant security breach, data loss, and severe reputational damage, all of which would be in direct violation of duties of care and potentially specific cybersecurity mandates requiring proactive threat management. A third incorrect approach is to attempt to remediate the issue independently by making configuration changes to the firewall without consulting the security team or following change management procedures. This introduces significant risk. Unsanctioned changes can inadvertently create new vulnerabilities, disrupt critical services, or interfere with the ongoing investigation. It also circumvents the established governance and oversight mechanisms designed to ensure system stability and security, which are often implicitly or explicitly required by regulatory bodies overseeing IT operations and data security. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such situations should employ a structured decision-making process. First, they must understand and adhere to their organization's established incident response plan and security policies. Second, they should prioritize clear and timely communication with the appropriate stakeholders, including the security team and management. Third, they must assess the potential impact of any action, considering both security risks and operational consequences. Finally, they should document all actions taken and decisions made, ensuring transparency and auditability, which are fundamental to both ethical conduct and regulatory compliance. Question 13. The evaluation methodology shows that a QRadar SIEM administrator, responsible for monitoring security alerts within a U.S.-based financial services organization, observes a series of unusual outbound network connections originating from a critical database server. The administrator suspects a potential data exfiltration event. Given the sensitive nature of the data and the regulatory environment, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action? Option A. Attempt to manually block the suspicious IP addresses at the firewall without further investigation or internal notification to quickly stop the data transfer. Option B. Delete the suspicious log entries from QRadar to prevent any potential misinterpretation of the event by auditors. Option C. Wait for the Security Operations Center (SOC) to confirm the alert with higher confidence before taking any action to avoid unnecessary disruption. Option D. Immediately begin isolating the affected server from the network to contain any potential data loss and preserve evidence, while simultaneously notifying internal legal and compliance teams as per the incident response plan. Correct answer is D. Immediately begin isolating the affected server from the network to contain any potential data loss and preserve evidence, while simultaneously notifying internal legal and compliance teams as per the incident response plan. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common ethical dilemma in cybersecurity administration, specifically concerning data privacy and incident response within a regulated financial services environment. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate need to investigate a potential security incident with the legal and ethical obligations to protect customer data and adhere to strict reporting timelines. The administrator must make a judgment call under pressure, knowing that either inaction or an improper response could have severe consequences for the organization and its clients. The specific jurisdiction for this exam is U.S. regulations, implying adherence to frameworks like SOX, GLBA, and relevant state data breach notification laws. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves immediately initiating the documented incident response plan, which includes isolating affected systems to prevent further compromise, preserving evidence for forensic analysis, and notifying the appropriate internal stakeholders, legal, compliance, management, as per policy. This aligns with best practices for incident handling and regulatory requirements. Specifically, under U.S. regulations like GLBA, financial institutions have a duty to protect customer information and must implement reasonable security measures. Prompt investigation and containment are critical to fulfilling this duty and mitigating potential harm. Furthermore, timely internal notification ensures that legal counsel can advise on disclosure obligations under various state and federal laws, such as the need to notify affected individuals and regulatory bodies within prescribed timeframes. This approach prioritizes a structured, compliant, and evidence-based response. Incorrect approach is analysis. Failing to immediately investigate and instead waiting for further confirmation or more information is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This delay could allow a breach to escalate, leading to greater data loss and more extensive damage. Under GLBA and SOX, financial institutions are expected to have robust security programs and respond diligently to suspected incidents. A delayed response could be interpreted as a failure to implement reasonable security measures. Attempting to resolve the issue without involving internal legal and compliance teams is also a critical failure. These teams are responsible for interpreting and ensuring adherence to complex U.S. data privacy and breach notification laws. Proceeding without their guidance risks making missteps in evidence handling, containment, or notification, which could lead to regulatory penalties, fines, and legal liabilities. For instance, improper evidence handling could compromise forensic investigations, and incorrect notification procedures could violate state breach laws. Deleting or altering logs to clean up the issue before a formal investigation is a severe ethical and regulatory violation. This constitutes obstruction of a potential investigation and destruction of evidence, which can carry significant legal penalties. It directly undermines the principles of accountability and transparency expected under financial regulations, and could be seen as an attempt to conceal a security failure. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should follow a structured decision-making process rooted in their organization's incident response plan and relevant regulatory frameworks. This involves 1. Recognizing the potential incident and its severity. 2. activating the incident response plan immediately. 3. Prioritizing containment and evidence preservation. 4. Engaging internal legal and compliance teams without delay. 5. Documenting all actions taken. 6. Communicating appropriately with stakeholders based on legal and compliance guidance. This systematic approach ensures that actions are compliant, effective, and defensible. Question 14. Analysis of a QRadar SIEM administrator's ethical dilemma when a senior executive, who is not directly involved in security operations, requests detailed information about specific threat detection rules and their effectiveness within the QRadar system, citing a need for a high-level overview for an upcoming board meeting. The administrator is concerned that providing this level of detail could inadvertently reveal the organization's defensive strategies and potential blind spots to someone without the necessary security clearance or understanding of the implications. Option A. Share the requested information directly with the executive, assuming their seniority implies a legitimate need and authorization for such data. Option B. Verify the executive's request with the Chief Information Security Officer, CISO, and provide a high-level, anonymized summary of QRadar's general threat detection capabilities, emphasizing the organization's overall security posture without disclosing specific rule configurations or performance metrics. Option C. Inform the executive that the requested information is highly sensitive and cannot be shared, without offering any alternative or seeking further clarification from security management. Option D. Immediately provide the executive with a comprehensive report detailing all active threat detection rules, their tuning parameters, and recent performance data, as the executive is a senior member of the organization. The correct answer is B. Verify the executive's request with the Chief Information Security Officer, CISO, and provide a high-level, anonymized summary of QRadar's general threat detection capabilities, emphasizing the organization's overall security posture without disclosing specific rule configurations or performance metrics. Explanation: Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the ethical obligation to maintain data integrity and confidentiality within a Security Operations Center (SOC) environment, specifically concerning the QRadar SIEM. The administrator is privy to sensitive information about potential vulnerabilities and the organization's response capabilities. The dilemma arises from a request that, if fulfilled without proper authorization and consideration, could inadvertently expose critical security posture details to an unauthorized party, potentially undermining the organization's defenses. The need for careful judgment stems from balancing the administrator's duty to respond to requests with the paramount responsibility of safeguarding sensitive security information. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to established organizational policies and procedures for handling sensitive data and system access requests. This means verifying the legitimacy of the requester, confirming the authorization level of the individual making the request, and ensuring that any information shared is done through approved channels and with appropriate oversight. In the context of QRadar SIEM, this would typically involve consulting with the security manager or compliance officer to validate the request and understand the potential implications of sharing specific QRadar data. This approach upholds the principles of least privilege, data confidentiality, and accountability, which are fundamental to robust cybersecurity practices and regulatory compliance. It ensures that QRadar's operational status and identified vulnerabilities are not compromised by unauthorized disclosure. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to fulfill the request immediately based on the perceived authority of the requester, without independent verification. This bypasses established security protocols and could lead to the unauthorized disclosure of sensitive QRadar configuration details or threat intelligence. Such an action would violate policies designed to prevent insider threats and accidental data breaches, potentially exposing the organization to significant risks. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the request altogether, citing workload or lack of immediate understanding. While caution is warranted, outright refusal without proper escalation or communication can lead to operational inefficiencies and may indicate a lack of understanding of the importance of timely information sharing within authorized parameters. It fails to address the underlying need for information, which, if legitimate, should be handled through proper channels. A third incorrect approach is to provide a generalized overview of QRadar's capabilities without addressing the specific information requested, hoping to satisfy the requester without revealing sensitive details. This is problematic because it is evasive and does not definitively resolve the request. It also fails to engage with the requester to understand the true nature and necessity of their information needs, potentially leading to further unauthorized attempts or misunderstandings about the security posture. Professional reasoning. Professionals in a SOC environment must adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes security, compliance, and ethical conduct. This framework includes 1. Understanding and strictly adhering to organizational security policies and procedures. 2. Verifying the identity and authorization of any individual requesting access to sensitive systems or information. 3. Escalating requests that fall outside of established protocols or involve sensitive data to appropriate management or compliance personnel. 4. Documenting all requests and actions taken. 5. Maintaining a commitment to data confidentiality and integrity. This systematic approach ensures that decisions are made with full awareness of potential risks and in alignment with regulatory and ethical obligations. Question 15. Strategic planning requires a proactive approach to data handling within QRadar SIEM v7. 5. An administrator is tasked with configuring logging levels to optimize security monitoring while ensuring compliance with data privacy regulations. The administrator identifies that certain log sources, if configured for maximum verbosity, will capture extensive personally identifiable information, PI, that is not directly relevant to the immediate security use cases, but could be valuable for future forensic analysis. What is the most responsible course of action to balance security needs with data privacy obligations? Option A. Configure logging to capture only the essential security event data required for immediate threat detection and incident response, and establish a separate, secure process for the selective, time-bound collection of more detailed forensic data when a specific incident warrants it, after consulting with legal and compliance teams. Option B. Disable logging for any log sources that are identified as potentially capturing sensitive PII, even if they provide valuable security event information, to completely avoid any privacy risks. Option C. Proceed with logging all identified PII data at maximum verbosity, assuming that the organization's general data protection policy implicitly covers such broad data collection for security purposes. Option D. Enable maximum verbosity for all log sources to ensure no potentially useful data is missed, as comprehensive logging is paramount for security, and address any privacy concerns reactively if a breach occurs. Correct answer is A. Configure logging to capture only the essential security event data required for immediate threat detection and incident response, and establish a separate, secure process for the selective, time-bound collection of more detailed forensic data when a specific incident warrants it, after consulting with legal and compliance teams. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common ethical dilemma in cybersecurity administration, specifically concerning data privacy and regulatory compliance within the context of QRadar SIEM. The challenge lies in balancing the immediate operational need for comprehensive logging with the legal and ethical obligations to protect sensitive personal data. The administrator is caught between a perceived security imperative and the potential for unauthorized data exposure, which could lead to significant regulatory penalties, reputational damage, and loss of trust. The pressure to maintain a secure environment while adhering to strict data protection laws requires careful judgment and a thorough understanding of both technical capabilities and legal frameworks. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a risk-based assessment and a commitment to data minimization principles, aligned with the principles of data protection regulations such as GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation. If the jurisdiction were European or similar frameworks like CCPA, California Consumer Privacy Act, in the U.S., which are relevant to data privacy. In the context of QRadar SIEM v7, 5 administration. This translates to configuring logging levels and data collection policies that capture necessary security events without indiscriminately collecting personally identifiable information, PI, or other sensitive data that is not strictly required for security monitoring and incident response. This approach prioritizes compliance by ensuring that only necessary data is logged, processed, and retained, thereby minimizing the risk of data breaches and unauthorized access. It reflects best professional practice by demonstrating due diligence, a commitment to privacy by design, and adherence to the principle of least privilege in data handling. Incorrect approaches analysis. Logging all data indiscriminately, regardless of its sensitivity or relevance to security, represents a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach violates the principle of data minimization, a cornerstone of most data protection regulations. It increases the attack surface by collecting and storing more sensitive data than necessary, making the organization a more attractive target and increasing the potential impact of a breach. Ethically, it demonstrates a disregard for individual privacy rights. Disabling logging for specific categories of events without a documented risk assessment or a clear understanding of the potential security implications is also problematic. While seemingly aimed at reducing data volume, this can create blind spots in security monitoring, hindering the ability to detect and respond to threats effectively. This could lead to regulatory noncompliance if the disabled logging prevents the organization from meeting its security obligations or incident response requirements. Failing to consult with legal or compliance teams when making decisions about data logging policies is a critical oversight. Security administrators are not legal experts, and decisions regarding data handling have significant legal ramifications. Without expert guidance, there is a high risk of misinterpreting regulations or implementing policies that inadvertently lead to noncompliance. This demonstrates a lack of professional responsibility and a failure to engage with the appropriate stakeholders. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such dilemmas should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, clearly define the operational and security requirements. Second, identify the types of data that would be logged to meet these requirements. Third, assess the sensitivity and privacy implications of each data type. Fourth, consult relevant legal and compliance frameworks and seek expert advice from legal counsel or data protection officers. Fifth, implement logging policies that adhere to the principle of data minimization and privacy by design, documenting all decisions and justifications. Finally, regularly review and audit logging configurations to ensure ongoing compliance and effectiveness. Question 16. The audit findings indicate that a critical QRadar SIEM data source is generating an excessive volume of logs, causing performance degradation and impacting the ability to detect genuine security threats. The administrator has identified a specific configuration setting that, if immediately altered, could resolve the performance issue. However, the standard operating procedure for QRadar configuration changes requires a formal change request, peer review, and scheduled deployment window, which would take several days to complete. The administrator is concerned that waiting for this process will leave the SIEM vulnerable and unable to effectively monitor for active threats. What is the most appropriate course of action? Option A. Immediately alter the QRadar configuration setting to resolve the performance issue, and then submit a retrospective change request with detailed documentation of the emergency action taken. Option B. Proceed with the formal change request process as per standard operating procedure, accepting the temporary performance degradation and increased risk. Option C. Manually edit the QRadar configuration files on the affected component to bypass the problematic logging mechanism, ensuring the change is not logged by the SIEM. Option D. Disable logging for the affected data source until the formal change request process can be completed to prevent further log generation and potential data corruption. Correct answer is A. Immediately alter the QRadar configuration setting to resolve the performance issue, and then submit a retrospective change request with detailed documentation of the emergency action taken. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge stemming from a conflict between the immediate need to address a critical security vulnerability and the established procedures for incident response and data handling. The pressure to act quickly to protect sensitive data, coupled with the potential for reputational damage or regulatory penalties if the breach is not contained, creates a high-stakes environment. The administrator must balance the urgency of the situation with the requirement to maintain data integrity, adhere to logging policies, and ensure that any actions taken are auditable and compliant with the organization's security framework, which is implicitly governed by U.S. regulations for a QRadar SIEM deployment in a U.S. context. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves meticulously documenting the incident and the remediation steps taken, even if it means a slight delay in full system restoration. This aligns with best professional practices and regulatory expectations in the U.S., such as those outlined by NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, guidelines for incident response and data security. Specifically, maintaining a detailed audit trail of all actions performed on the SIEM system is crucial for post-incident analysis, compliance verification, and demonstrating due diligence. This approach ensures that the integrity of the QRadar logs, which are vital for forensic investigation and regulatory reporting, is preserved. It also supports the principle of least privilege and accountability, as all modifications are recorded. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately disabling logging for the affected data source to prevent further log generation and potential data corruption. This is a significant regulatory and ethical failure because it directly compromises the integrity and completeness of the audit trail. U.S. regulations, such as those under HIPAA for healthcare data or SOX for financial data, mandate accurate and complete logging for security and compliance purposes. Disabling logging, even with good intentions, creates gaps in the SIEM visibility, hindering forensic investigations and making it impossible to accurately assess the scope and impact of the incident. It also violates the principle of non-repudiation, as the actions taken during the incident would not be fully logged. Another incorrect approach is to manually edit or delete specific log entries that are believed to be causing the issue or are deemed sensitive. This is a severe ethical and regulatory violation. Tampering with log data is a direct contravention of data integrity principles and is often considered evidence tampering in a legal or regulatory context. It undermines the trustworthiness of the entire SIEM system and any subsequent analysis. Organizations are expected to maintain logs in their original, unaltered state for audit and compliance. Such actions would likely result in severe penalties and loss of credibility. A third incorrect approach is to bypass the standard incident response protocol and directly modify QRadar configurations without proper authorization or documentation. While the intent might be to quickly resolve the issue, this bypasses critical oversight and control mechanisms. It violates internal security policies and potentially external regulatory requirements that mandate change management and documented incident response procedures. This lack of a documented, controlled process makes it difficult to verify the effectiveness of the fix, understand the full impact of the changes, and could lead to unintended consequences or the introduction of new vulnerabilities. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing such a dilemma should follow a structured incident response plan. This typically involves 1. Identification and triage, quickly assessing the situation and its severity. 2. Containment, taking steps to limit the damage, which may involve temporary isolation of affected components but not destruction of evidence. 3. Eradication, removing the root cause of the incident. 4. Recovery, restoring systems to normal operation. 5. Lessons learned, conducting a post-incident review. Throughout this process, meticulous documentation and adherence to established logging and auditing policies are paramount. When in doubt, consulting with senior security personnel, legal counsel, or compliance officers is essential to ensure all actions are compliant and ethically sound. The priority is always to protect the organization while upholding the integrity of its security systems and data. Question 17. Research into a QRadar SIEM administrator's discovery of unusual network traffic patterns coinciding with a sudden degradation in application performance, raising concerns about a potential security incident. What is the most ethically and regulatorily sound immediate course of action? Option A. Immediately investigate and attempt to resolve the application performance issue by making system changes, documenting the changes after the fact. Option B. Proceed with troubleshooting the application performance issue by making system changes and only report the network traffic anomaly if it is confirmed to be a security incident. Option C. Document the observed network traffic anomalies and performance degradation and immediately escalate to the security incident response team for guidance before making any system modifications. Option D. Ignore the network traffic anomaly, assuming it is unrelated to the performance issue, and focus solely on troubleshooting the application. The correct answer is A. Immediately investigate and attempt to resolve the application performance issue by making system changes, documenting the changes after the fact. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge rooted in the ethical obligation to maintain data integrity and confidentiality, while also adhering to regulatory requirements for incident reporting and system monitoring. The administrator is caught between the immediate need to resolve a performance issue and the potential for that resolution to inadvertently obscure evidence of a security incident. The pressure to restore service quickly can conflict with the meticulous, evidence-preserving steps required by security best practices and compliance mandates. The administrator must exercise sound judgment to balance operational demands with security and regulatory responsibilities. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves prioritizing the preservation of evidence and adhering to established incident response procedures. This aligns with regulatory frameworks that mandate timely and accurate reporting of security incidents and the maintenance of audit trails. By first documenting the observed anomaly and its potential impact, and then consulting with the security team before making any changes, the administrator ensures that any actions taken are deliberate and do not compromise the investigation. This approach upholds the principle of least privilege in system modification and demonstrates a commitment to data integrity, which is a cornerstone of many cybersecurity regulations. It also ensures that the organization can meet its legal and compliance obligations for incident detection and response. Incorrect approach is analysis, an approach that immediately attempts to resolve the performance issue without proper documentation or consultation, risks destroying or altering critical forensic data. This could violate regulations requiring the preservation of evidence for audits or investigations. If the performance issue was indeed a symptom of a security incident, such actions would hinder the ability to understand the scope and nature of the breach, potentially leading to non-compliance with breach notification laws. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the anomaly, assuming it is a benign performance issue. This fails to meet the regulatory and ethical obligation to actively monitor systems for security threats. Proactive threat detection and response are fundamental to cybersecurity compliance. Ignoring potential indicators of compromise can lead to significant security breaches and subsequent regulatory penalties for failing to implement adequate security controls. Finally, an approach that involves making undocumented changes to the system to resolve the performance issue, even with good intentions, is problematic. Lack of documentation means that the actions taken cannot be audited or verified, which is a direct contravention of many compliance requirements for system changes and incident response. It also prevents a clear understanding of what was done, making it difficult to determine if the issue was truly resolved or if further investigation is needed. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should follow a structured decision-making process. First, recognize the potential security implications of any system anomaly. Second, prioritize evidence preservation by documenting observations and avoiding immediate, potentially destructive, troubleshooting steps. Third, consult with the designated security incident response team or relevant stakeholders to ensure a coordinated and compliant response. Fourth, follow established organizational policies and procedures for incident handling and system changes. This systematic approach ensures that operational needs are met without compromising security, regulatory compliance, or the integrity of potential evidence. Question 18. Compliance review shows that the organization's QRadar SIEM deployment may not be optimally configured to meet current regulatory data retention and security monitoring requirements, leading to potential gaps in both security visibility and auditability. The current configuration has resulted in significant storage pressure and an increasing volume of unanalyzed log data. Which of the following approaches best addresses this situation to ensure ongoing compliance and effective security operations? Option A. Immediately increase the storage capacity of the QRadar SIEM to accommodate the growing volume of log data, assuming that simply retaining more data will satisfy compliance needs. Option B. Implement a phased approach to log source optimization, prioritizing log sources based on their criticality to security monitoring and regulatory compliance, and adjusting retention policies accordingly after a thorough analysis of data relevance and legal requirements. Option C. Proactively disable log sources that are perceived to be generating a high volume of data, but are not immediately associated with critical security alerts, in an effort to reduce storage pressure. Option D. Rely on tribal knowledge and informal discussions with IT and security staff to determine which log sources are most important and should be retained, without conducting a formal audit or analysis. The correct answer is B. Implement a phased approach to log source optimization, prioritizing log sources based on their criticality to security monitoring and regulatory compliance, and adjusting retention policies accordingly after a thorough analysis of data relevance and legal requirements. Explanation: this scenario presents a common challenge in SIEM administration, balancing the need for comprehensive logging with the operational realities of data volume and retention. The professional challenge lies in interpreting regulatory requirements for data retention and security monitoring in the context of QRadar's capabilities and resource constraints. Careful judgment is required to ensure that security posture is not compromised while adhering to compliance mandates. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it directly addresses the identified compliance gap by implementing a phased, risk-based strategy for log source optimization. This involves a thorough analysis of log source criticality and relevance to security monitoring and incident response, aligning with the principle of effective resource allocation. By prioritizing critical log sources and implementing appropriate retention policies based on regulatory and business needs, it ensures that QRadar is effectively utilized for its intended purpose, detecting and responding to security threats while meeting compliance obligations. This proactive and analytical method demonstrates a commitment to both security and regulatory adherence. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on increasing storage capacity without a strategic review of log sources fails to address the root cause of potential compliance issues. It represents a reactive and potentially wasteful expenditure, and more importantly, it doesn't guarantee that the increased data volume is actually contributing to effective security monitoring or meeting specific retention requirements for all necessary data. This could lead to a situation where compliance is technically met by storing data, but the ability to analyze and act upon it is hindered by noise and irrelevant information, or critical data is still not being retained for the required period. Another incorrect approach that involves indiscriminately disabling log sources to reduce volume ignores the potential for missing critical security events or failing to meet specific regulatory mandates for log collection. This is a direct violation of the principle of maintaining a comprehensive security posture and can lead to significant compliance failures if certain log types are mandated for retention or audit purposes. It prioritizes operational ease over security and compliance. A third incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or assumptions about log source importance without a formal assessment is professionally unsound. It introduces significant risk by potentially overlooking critical data or retaining unnecessary data, leading to inefficient resource utilization and potential compliance breaches. This approach lacks the rigor required for a defensible compliance strategy. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured, risk-based approach. First, thoroughly understand all applicable regulatory requirements for data logging and retention. Second, conduct a comprehensive audit of all log sources feeding into QRadar, assessing their relevance to security monitoring and compliance. Third, develop a tiered strategy for log source management, prioritizing critical sources and defining appropriate retention policies based on regulatory and business needs. Fourth, implement changes incrementally, with thorough testing and validation to ensure no security gaps are introduced. Finally, establish a regular review process to adapt to evolving threats and regulatory landscapes. Question 19. Compliance review shows that the organization's QRadar SIEM v7.5 deployment is ingesting a significant volume of logs, but there is a concern that critical security events might be overlooked due to alert fatigue and inefficient data processing. The review also highlighted potential gaps in meeting specific regulatory mandates related to data logging and retention for certain sensitive systems. Considering the need to optimize process efficiency and ensure robust compliance, which of the following approaches to log source management in QRadar would be most professionally sound? Option A. Implement a strategy to minimize log ingestion by excluding any log source that does not directly contribute to a high volume of alerts, with the primary goal of reducing storage and processing costs, regardless of its compliance relevance or potential for detecting low-frequency, high-impact threats. Option B. Rely exclusively on the default log source configurations provided by IBM QRadar v7. 5. Assuming these are universally optimized for all organizations and regulatory environments, and avoid any custom tuning or analysis of log source effectiveness. Option C. Focus on ingesting the highest volume log sources to ensure maximum data coverage, assuming that more data will inherently lead to better security outcomes, and address compliance concerns through manual log analysis only when specifically requested by auditors. Option D. Prioritize the onboarding of log sources that are explicitly mandated by relevant U.S. cybersecurity regulations and industry-specific compliance frameworks, and those that provide high-fidelity data for detecting and responding to the organization's most significant threat vectors, followed by a periodic review and tuning process. The correct answer is D. Prioritize the onboarding of log sources that are explicitly mandated by relevant U.S. cybersecurity regulations and industry-specific compliance frameworks, and those that provide high-fidelity data for detecting and responding to the organization's most significant threat vectors, followed by a periodic review and tuning process. Explanation: this scenario presents a common challenge in security information and event management, SIEM, administration, balancing the need for comprehensive data collection with the operational realities of storage, processing, and performance. The challenge lies in identifying and prioritizing the most critical log sources that provide actionable intelligence for threat detection and incident response, while also meeting regulatory compliance requirements. Overcollection can lead to alert fatigue, increased costs, and slower analysis, while undercollection can create blind spots and compliance gaps. Careful judgment is required to make informed decisions about log source inclusion and exclusion based on risk, compliance mandates, and operational impact. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it aligns with a risk-based methodology and a proactive compliance strategy. By focusing on log sources mandated by relevant regulations, e.g., PCI DSS, HIPAA, GDPR, depending on the jurisdiction and industry. Though for this exam's context, we assume a general U.S. regulatory framework for IT security and data protection, and those that directly contribute to detecting and responding to high-priority threats, the organization ensures that its QRadar SIEM deployment is both effective and compliant. This approach optimizes resource utilization, reduces noise, and ensures that security analysts can focus on genuine security events. It demonstrates a commitment to both security posture and regulatory adherence, which are intertwined in modern cybersecurity governance. An incorrect approach that prioritizes only high-volume log sources without considering their security relevance or compliance mandates is professionally unacceptable. This can lead to the ingestion of vast amounts of low-value data, masking critical security events, and increasing the risk of missing significant threats. It also fails to address specific regulatory requirements, potentially exposing the organization to fines and reputational damage. Another incorrect approach that focuses solely on minimizing storage costs without a thorough risk assessment or compliance review is equally problematic. While cost efficiency is important, it should not come at the expense of security or compliance. This approach risks creating significant gaps in visibility and audit trails, making it impossible to meet regulatory obligations or effectively investigate security incidents. A third incorrect approach that relies on default QRadar configurations without customization or a strategic review ignores the unique risk profile and compliance obligations of the organization. Default settings are often generic and may not adequately address specific industry regulations or the organization's critical assets, leading to both security vulnerabilities and compliance deficiencies. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a structured risk assessment framework. This includes identifying critical assets and data, understanding relevant regulatory requirements, evaluating the threat landscape, and then mapping these factors to specific log sources. A phased approach to log source onboarding, starting with the most critical and gradually expanding based on demonstrated value and compliance needs, is advisable. Regular reviews and tuning of log source configurations are essential to maintain effectiveness and adapt to evolving threats and regulations. Question 20. Which approach would be most effective for optimizing QRadar SIEM v7? 5. Performance while ensuring comprehensive threat detection and compliance with security monitoring mandates. Option A. Disable less critical security rules to reduce the processing load on QRadar, focusing only on high-severity alerts. Option B. Rely solely on QRadar's default configurations and vendor-provided rule sets without any custom tuning or optimization. Option C. Prioritize the ingestion of critical log sources identified through risk assessment and compliance requirements, followed by iterative tuning of rules based on observed false positives and performance metrics. Option D. Enable all available log sources and security rules by default to ensure maximum visibility and address performance issues as they arise. The correct answer is C. Prioritize the ingestion of critical log sources identified through risk assessment and compliance requirements, followed by iterative tuning of rules based on observed false positives and performance metrics. Explanation: this scenario presents a common challenge in SIEM administration, balancing the need for comprehensive threat detection with the operational realities of resource constraints and potential performance degradation. The professional challenge lies in making informed decisions that optimize QRadar's effectiveness without compromising its ability to ingest, process, and analyze security events in real time, which is critical for meeting regulatory compliance and incident response objectives. Careful judgment is required to avoid overconfiguration that leads to performance issues or underconfiguration that creates blind spots. The correct approach represents best professional practice because it prioritizes a data-driven, iterative, and risk-based methodology. By first identifying critical log sources and then tuning rules based on observed false positives and performance metrics, administrators ensure that QRadar is focused on the most impactful data. This aligns with the principle of efficient resource allocation and effective threat detection, which are implicitly required by regulations mandating robust security monitoring and incident response capabilities. Focusing on high-fidelity alerts reduces alert fatigue for security analysts, enabling them to respond more effectively to genuine threats, thereby enhancing the overall security posture and compliance with incident reporting timelines. An incorrect approach that involves indiscriminately enabling all available log sources without prior analysis is professionally unacceptable. This can lead to overwhelming the QRadar system, causing performance degradation, increased storage costs, and a deluge of low-value or noisy data. This inefficiency hinders the ability to detect real threats and can lead to missed incidents, which would be a failure to meet regulatory requirements for timely detection and reporting. Another incorrect approach, disabling essential security rules to reduce processing load without a thorough risk assessment, is also professionally unacceptable. This creates significant security gaps and directly contravenes the purpose of a SIEM. Regulations often mandate specific types of monitoring and detection capabilities, and disabling rules without understanding the implications could result in non-compliance and a failure to protect sensitive data. Finally, an approach that solely relies on vendor default configurations without any tuning or optimization fails to leverage the full capabilities of QRadar and may not adequately address the specific threat landscape or regulatory requirements of the organization. This passive approach can lead to suboptimal security coverage and missed threats, representing a failure in professional due diligence. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a phased approach. 1. Understand organizational assets and critical data. 2. Identify relevant regulatory and compliance mandates. 3. Prioritize log sources based on criticality and compliance requirements. 4. Implement a phased deployment and tuning strategy for log sources and rules. 5. Continuously monitor QRadar performance and alert fidelity. 6. Regularly review and adjust configurations based on evolving threats, organizational changes, and performance data. 7. Document all configuration changes and the rationale behind them.